The Fallen are something that I often get requests to cover, and so after recently converting a Primaris Azrael, I thought it was finally time that I give these hunted some attention. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this video, I'll be showing you how to build Fallen. Now, as you can see, the basis of this conversion came from the Chaos Warriors, specifically those found within the Start Collecting Slaves to Darkness set. Now, these might seem to be an odd starting point for a Space Marine, but I wanted to move away from that traditional appearance. These Chaos Warriors gave me something that was fully encased in plate armor, along with some light Chaos influences in form of traditionally chaotic spikes and stars of chaos. While their armor might be lighter than power armor, and they sport a more unusual marine attire like boots and gloves, I felt that this all fed into the scavenging and desperate nature of the Fallen. Once I had a torso picked out, I could begin my modifications to turn this Age of Sigmar miniature into one from the 41st millennium. To start, I wanted to swap out the weapon arm to one carrying a bolter, but first I needed to remove the existing hand completely. As these models are wearing plate armor, it's very easy to see exactly where a cut should be made. So, armed with my clippers, I first removed the right hand before clipping away the remaining part of the weapon that was being held against the wrist. With these parts removed, I used my knife to scrape and cut away any remaining pieces of plastic and to return to the smooth finish of the armor beneath the wrist. But I didn't add the new weapon just yet. I still had a number of adjustments to make first. So, while the more subtle chaos elements of these warriors were welcome in this conversion, some of the stronger chaotic details needed to be removed. For example, this particular torso came with a spike emanating from the shoulder. The chances are that the spike is just a decoration of the armor and not actually a physical mutation, but I chose to avoid the potential for confusion altogether and just remove it. I began with my clippers to remove the bulk of the spike before removing what was left using my knife. Next up, I had to build one of the more iconic parts of a Space Marine, which would help to add that Astartes aspect to this Age of Sigmar miniature. This was, of course, the Power Pack. Now, in building this miniature, I took a lot of direction from the Cypher model. His armor has been cobbled together from scavenged parts, and he is likely to be better equipped than most of his cohorts. I really wanted to lean heavily into this aspect, and the Power Pack was a good place to start. I began with a Mark III pack and a Mark IV pack, taken from their respective plastic kits. I started by using my saw to remove one of the upper vents from the Mark IV pack, trying to stay as close to the main body of that pack as possible. Once removed, I kept hold of that vent and then proceeded to clip away the left vent from the Mark III pack. As I wasn't retaining this particular part, it didn't matter quite as much if the cut wasn't as neat here. With both removed, I could clean up the Mark III pack and the Mark IV vent using my knife. Next, I sawed away one of the smaller vents from the Mark IV pack before clipping away one from the right hand side of the Mark III. These were also cleaned up using my knife. Finally, I could glue the pack together. The result was a pack that appeared to have been constructed from a few mismatching components. Unlike chapters or traitor legions, the Fallen are unlikely to have access to Forge Worlds to acquire new equipment or to properly repair damage. As such, they must make do with jerry-rigging what they can find, and the backpack was a good starting point to reflect this. Now that I had completed my haphazard power pack, I needed a way to attach it to the torso. The particular torso I'd chosen was wearing a cape, and so the raised folds would likely just get in the way of achieving a good bond over a good surface area. So, armed with my knife and a file, I set about flattening out a small area immediately in the middle of the Chaos Warrior's back. During this process, I made frequent comparisons between the torso and the backpack until I was happy that they were sitting well against each other, but I didn't glue anything together just yet. With the work on the backpack completed, I could begin to focus on this Fallen Space Marine's armaments. I decided to start with the left arm, which originally would have been carrying a shield. While I was tempted to keep the shield aspect to a model, after all, the Dark Angels are pretty heavy on the knight aesthetic, I ultimately settled on equipping a chainsword. This particular chainsword was taken from the Chaos Space Marine kit, but considering that I was going for a cobbled together appearance, I could have used any Firstborn Marine scaled weapon here. When compared against the original shield, I could see that to match the arm's length, I would need to make a cut just above the elbow armor. But in addition to this, I would also need to clip away the small protruding strut from the upper left arm. Using my saw, I made a cut through the Chaos Chainsword arm, lining the saw up next to the upper side of the elbow plate. For thicker components like this, I generally recommend using a saw over clippers. Clippers can cause a pinching in effect that may damage the part, so just keep that in mind for your own kit bashing. To check how everything was fitting together, I temporarily attached the front of the torso and lined up the new chainsword arm. I could see from this that more adjustments were needed. I made the necessary cuts and continued to check the fit until I was happy that the new chainsword arm would fit against both halves of the torso. Going back to the Cypher model, I particularly like his cut off left shoulder pad that sits above his cloak and wanted to reproduce this on this miniature. So I began with another component from the Mark III Space Marine kit, this shoulder pad. With my saw, I made a horizontal cut across the pad, just a few millimeters above the bottom section of the trim. After this rough cut, I then proceeded to use my scalpel and my file to clean up and generally round out the edges in order to better reflect that worn by Cypher. Like with the power pack, I now needed to make some adjustments to the cloak to allow the new shoulder pad to fit. I chose the right shoulder as this was the area that I had removed the spike from earlier, and I now had a hole that needed covering. My torso was already temporarily assembled, which meant I could check the fit of the shoulder pad before making the required adjustments with my knife. I made small, incremental trims until I was happy that the pad was fitting in a natural way. So now I had finally made all of the adjustments to the torso. I now felt comfortable enough gluing everything together. I've said it before in my previous guides, but if you know you need to make cuts to a part, you're always best doing it before you glue anything to it. There have been countless times where I've been cutting and the model has just fallen apart in my hands, so play it safe and glue last. At this stage, I completed the vast majority of the model. I just needed a weapon and a helmet, and the ever-glorious Mark III would provide once again. But before I could attach this weapon to the rest of the model, I needed to make some adjustments to the wrist. So I followed the same procedure, compare, trim, compare steps as before, until I was happy with how the wrist was lining up, but I didn't bring in the glue just yet. As I really like the belt magazines that the Chaos Space Marines have, and thought that this would be a good way of adding a little chaotic flair to the Mark III bolter, with my clippers I removed the magazine from the Mark III bolter and the belt from a Chaos Space Marine bolter. I cleaned up the cuts before gluing them together and attaching the bolter to the arm. Which brought me to the helmet, which of course was a Mark III. The only adjustment I needed to make here was a slight trim to the back of the helmet. The power pack was sitting a little closer to the torso than normal, so this was needed to help it to fit a little better. Now this part wasn't glued either, but that was just to make painting it easier later on. The final details to add were some Dark Angel iconography. Up until this point, the model could have easily been mistaken for a regular Chaos Space Marine, so I needed some of the winged sword details to help tie it in to the theme of the Fallen. Now these components can be sourced from a number of different Dark Angel kits, but I chose this particular book and small shield from the Primus upgrade kit. These small trinkets can be added wherever you see fit. And with that, the model was complete. They just needed painting, basing and assembling, which left me with this. Here we have the completed Fallen painted in the traditional red and black colours. When approaching this particular conversion, my initial thoughts were to simply go down the more traditional route of modifying Dark Angel miniatures, or even mixing Firstborn Marine parts with Chaos Space Marines. Both would have been perfectly viable solutions, but I wanted something that looked a little different, something that could reflect desperation. By having a model that appeared to only have remnants of their original power armor still intact, I think I was able to reflect the toll that spending potentially hundreds if not thousands of years being hunted down would take on a Space Marine. So you might think that boots on a Space Marine is odd, but that's okay. I just wanted to try something different, and I think that I managed that. So let me know what you think of the results in the comments below. Don't forget to leave me a like and make sure you subscribe to see my future conversions. Which brings me to say a massive thank you to my supporters. Currently, my top supporters on Patreon are Stuart Smith, Jeremy Kaup, Jake, and Daniel Dowling. So a big thank you to you guys, and if you also support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee or you just use my affiliates links. And your help is what keeps this channel alive, and it's what allows me to build these different kinds of conversions for you. If you'd like to help me out, then you can check out the description for all the relevant links. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.